so much for being with us on this beautiful Sunday morning. We're going to get to our first question here in a second about this new series we're in. But first thing I want to bring your attention to is that we have Easter in the midst of this on April the 20th. Someone in here will find out the joke of that day specifically. But anyway, I'll leave it to that. Easter is not the joke, it's the date. 7:15, 8:30, 10 o'clock, and 11:30 a.m. We have 4 services on Easter Sunday. We'd love to invite you to come and be part of that first service at 7:15. I know that might be a little early for some of you, but we had over 1,000 people last week, and we'd love to push people to that service. It's going to be a little bit shorter. Maybe we'll come up with something fun and enjoyable so that you can be here and participate during that service if you want to get up early and enjoy the rest of your Easter Sunday. We don't have kids classes during that service. We do have them during the other 3 services, but hope you will join us for that. One other thing I would say is that on that Sunday, we like to say, hey, it's sort of a baptism Sunday for us. We do that a couple times a year. We have people get baptized all the time. In fact, our first service, we had Kaylee and Carmen that were baptized, and we got to celebrate with them. But we like to be able to say, hey, here's a Sunday. If you want to get baptized, we have a group of people that want to do that too. And so if you want to take that step in your spiritual journey, you can sign up through the QR code in front of you or through our app, or you can just stop by the New Here table outside and ask our individuals out there. They would love to answer those questions for you. But that's coming up on Easter Sunday. The other thing is that next week, we're going to give you kind of a fun way to invite people to Easter. We've got something that we've put together that I think is going to be a kind of a neat way, a fun way again, to say, hey, we want to invite you to come hang out with us on Easter Sunday. Not going to tell you what it is, but come back next week and we'll give that to you and give you a chance to invite your family, your friends, maybe your ones to come and to be a part of Easter with us, all right? Good stuff happening in the church and in here in the next couple of weeks when Easter arrives. Last week, we had Generosity Feeds. How many of you were there and helped us with Generosity Feeds? Yeah, it was a blast. We had a great time. Here's a little recap video of what we experienced. Thank you to everyone who was a part of that last week. We had a great time. Yep. Like I said, over 500 people volunteered to be a part of that, and we packaged 20,000 meals. If you're new here, those meals don't go to some other country. They don't go to some other city. They actually stay here in the Springfield area to help with food insecurity in our community. And so we love this event because of that. But thank you so much for everyone who made that happen. All right, kids ask some pretty fascinating questions, don't they? Why is the sky blue? Here's a good one. Where do babies come from? That's always a fun one to answer. And maybe for your kids, it's, why do we drive on parkways and park on driveways? I don't know if your kids asked that question before, but kids do. They ask fascinating questions. As we get older, we continue to ask pretty fascinating questions. Questions like, why do my property taxes keep going up? That's a fun one. How am I going to pay for my kids' college tuition? Why isn't ice cream one of the main food groups, right? These are questions we ask when we become adults. But the thing about these questions we ask as kids and the things that we ask as adults, we kind of get the answers to over time, right? We get to this place where we're like, this is why the sky is blue. This is where babies come from. These are all these things that we have asked questions about. Now we have answers to. There's one area of life I feel like we ask questions about that we rarely get answers to, and that's questions when it comes to who God is. We have these questions about God, and And maybe throughout our life, we continue to ask, but we really never find answers to those questions. And so that's why today we are beginning this brand new series called God, I Have a Question. And so over these next 6 weeks, we've got 6 different questions that we're going to ask and we're going to walk through and try to answer as we talk through these questions. Now, I know there's a lot more questions that you may have, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but we feel like these are 6 big questions that get asked a lot about God. And so over these next few weeks, we're going to do theology, okay? Theology is a big church word. What does that mean? It just means the study of God. And so over these next 6 weeks, we're going to take time looking through these questions as we do this study of God. All right. But before we get there, before we even begin this series, I want to lay a few things down for you. The first thing is, we are not trying to change your view of God, okay? You might have some deeply held convictions and views and beliefs about God. We are in no way trying to change that. We're not trying to make you think differently or believe differently. However, in this series, we want to challenge you in your beliefs and your views. As we're challenging ourselves, as Joel and I speak over these next few weeks, we're going to challenge all of us in those views and beliefs, but we're not trying to change your views about God. Second thing I would say, you're probably going to leave every week with more questions than you came in on that particular day with, right? So we have this thing that we have set up here. Throughout this series, you can actually text us your questions that you have as we walk through it. 703-844-9870. Put that in your phone. So as we're talking today, if you're like, man, I got a question about that, type that question in. Just send it right to that text, that number right there. If you've got our app, if you go to the very first page there, the home page, there's a graphic that says, God, I have a question. If you click on that, there's a form you can send. I think in the QR code in front of you, you can click that too, and there's an opportunity to send those questions in. What are we going to do with those questions? Nothing. We're just going to hold on to them, right? Yeah. Now, we're going to do something with them. We're actually going to do the best that we can at the end of the series, not each week. At the end of the series, Joel and myself, maybe a couple other people, we're going to kind of do the best we can to answer some of the bigger questions that come out of that. We may not be able to answer your question, but we're going to do our best to help us kind of walk through the questions that may arise throughout this series, all right? You're going to have more questions. We want to help you answer those questions. But part of this falls on you. There's actually a resource page on our website. If you go to thejourneynova.org, you go to the resources button, you click on that. If you look down, it says current series. If you click on current series, every single week we're putting up books and podcasts and articles that you can go back, you can read, you can listen to, that these questions you might have, you might find answers to doing some of your own research. We are not here to tell you, hey, this is the answer, okay? We're going to say, hey, this is what it may look like, but you need to do a little work on your own and do some theology on your own, some studying of God yourself. And so we're going to be changing that throughout the week. We'll add stuff as we're studying, as we're working on this, as we're talking. We'll do this every single week. As you go there right now, it's got week 1. It's got the first question there, and I think Joel has about 15 different items there that you can read or that you can listen to. But part of this falls on you too, okay? All right, here we go. Gotta have a question. Question number 1, God, how do I know you exist? It's a pretty big question to start with, and before I start to maybe give us some answers, possible answers to this question, let's start with some common reasons why people do not believe God exists. Okay, I'm going to walk through these pretty quickly here. I've got 4 listed. There are a ton more. If you do any kind of research, you're going to find so many more. I feel like these are sort of the top 4 that get mentioned quite a bit. Here's the first one. Lack of evidence for God. Some people say the only way that I'm going to believe that God actually exists, if I can see God, I can hear God, I can touch God. If I have this empirical evidence that God is real and God is in front of me, then I can believe that God exists. And so because, there's this lack of evidence of that kind of physical God right in front of you, you can see, hear, and touch. People say, well, you know what? I don't believe that God is real. So for some, they fall in this lack of evidence. Others, how do you explain all the evil in the world? It's a big question. In fact, a couple of weeks from now, we're going to work towards finding an answer to that question. But you look around at all the suffering and the hurt and the pain, We look around, we see the injustices and evils in the world, and we think, I mean, there's this supposed God who loves and cares for people. How could there be all this evil in the world? And for some people, that's a reason they don't believe in God. Another reason, if there's a God, why are there so many different religions? In the world today, there are over 10,000 different religions. And some people are like, well, if there's that many different religions, if there was a God, you just have one religion, right? Well, what about those of us who believe in the existence of God, right? We believe in Jesus. Why are there so many different denominations? I think in the United States, there are about 3,500 different denominations. Shouldn't there just be one? Right? Shouldn't there just be one faith, one religion if God is real? And so because there's so many different religions or even so many different denominations, people are like, well, there must not be a God. And then the last one I will share, for some, it's been a negative experience with religion, or more specifically with religious people. Maybe you grew up in a church that was cruel to, we'll just say, outsiders. Maybe for you, the conversations that you've heard or experiences you've had or actions you've seen by Christians, maybe for you or for other people you know, they don't believe in God, because why would a Christian act or say those things? Or it could be spiritual abuse. Maybe you encountered spiritual abuse at some point in your life, or you experienced spiritual abuse. I mean, these are people that say they follow God, they follow Jesus, and yet their actions and their words seem to be very different than what they say they believe. And so many times, people who don't believe in God will say there was negative experiences they've had with religious people. Like I said, this list could go on and on. There are many different reasons why people may not believe in the existence of God. And I will tell you, all of those are valid. Those are very valid reasons for not to believe in the existence of God. And some of you may be here today and you're like, well, I don't know that I necessarily believe in the existence of God. I just want to let you know that you are in a very safe place, okay? We want to be a church where you can come and you can ask those hard questions and nobody makes fun of you, nobody looks down upon you. I mean, the name of our church is The Journey. You know why it's The Journey? Because we're all on a spiritual journey. And none of us have found the end point yet. The end point comes when we die. That's when the end comes. We're always growing in our faith. And so if you're at this stage like, I don't know what I think about this God existing, great. This is a safe place for you to ask those questions. Again, you can actually ask those questions as we go through this series. But let's go back to this question that we're asking today. God, how do I know that you exist? You realize this question has been around for thousands of years, okay? It's not just in the last couple of years. It's not just in the last 100 years or so. This question has been around for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, if we go to the book of Acts in the New Testament, we find Paul. If you're not familiar with Paul, Paul was a guy who was persecuting the Christians, and he becomes a Christian, becomes a follower of Jesus. He ends up being this pastor, and he goes and plants churches all throughout the Middle East and parts of Asia. And as he's doing this, he's meeting people, he's hanging out with people. Well, we find him in Acts chapter 17. We find him in Athens. Athens at that time was really the intellectual center of the world. Paul is there. Now, usually when he goes to some city or town, he'll go to one of the synagogues and he'll start to have some conversations with the religious leaders. This time it's a little bit different, okay? He doesn't go to a synagogue. He goes to this place where you have all these philosophers hanging out. And so he goes to these philosophers and he begins this speech in Acts chapter 17, starting with verse 22. So Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows. Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way, for as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines. And one of your altars had this inscription on it, to an unknown God. Sometimes when you read this and think Paul's making fun of them when he says that, I can see you're very religious. He's actually not making fun of them. In Athens at that time, if you were to walk around that city, there were altars like all over the place. And these altars were to known gods and unknown gods. So they were very religious people. Now, what was your religion? It was whatever you wanted it to be. You can make up whatever religion you wanted. I mean, that was kind of the heartbeat of who Athens was. Paul is walking through the city. He sees this particular altar and he notices the inscription on it, to an unknown God. And so as he begins this speech with him, as he begins this conversation, he's like, hey, you believe in something. Now, apparently, you don't know what that something is or that someone is, but you have some belief in something. You're still searching for that unknown God. Then Paul says this to them: this God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one I'm telling you about. Paul's like, hey, this unknown God, hey, let me tell you about this God. Let me tell you how you can know this God that at this moment you don't know, that this God is real and this God exists. He says this in verse 24. He said, he is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he's Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. From one man, he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. Here's Paul's like, hey, this God you can't explain is real and true and loves humanity. Now, what Paul does here as he's sharing these words with those philosophers on that particular day is he uses some of the Old Testament descriptions of God. And at the same time, the way that he words this, it would have connected with these philosophers and the way they thought about life. I mean, he's telling them, he's like, hey, you're searching for something, right? You're searching for this purpose for your life. You're searching for this meaning of life. You're searching for some creator of life. And so you're talking about this unknown God, and I'm here to tell you that unknown God is not unknown. Again, that God exists. That God created all things. And then he says this in verse 27. His purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. Again, he's using words that they would have understood when he's talking to this group of philosophers. He said, like, you live your life with these philosophical ideas, right? These philosophical ideals in your mind. You're searching for something. What are you searching for? You're searching for truth. You're searching for the divine. And yet, even in searching these things, you really have no hope of success in finding what you're looking for. Here he is saying, you have questions about this unknown God, this God you can't see, this God you can't hear, this God you can't touch. Great. Here's what you do. You seek out this God that I'm telling you about. Maybe for some of us, as we look at this passage here and what Paul is experiencing with these philosophers, maybe for some of us this sounds familiar. Like we're looking for something. We're looking for someone in our life. And maybe for some, like, I'm not quite sure what that is. I've heard about this God, or I maybe trying to believe in this existence of God, but I can't touch this God. I can't see this God. I can't hear this God. How am I supposed to believe in the existence of this God? How do I know this God exists? I want to spend the next few moments walking through 4 arguments for the existence of God. And I know that sounds boring. I'm not going to try to make it boring for you, okay? Because these are very powerful, I believe, and have helped me in my own journey figure out the existence of God. So I'm going to share these 4 with you. By the way, if you've got our app, if you go to the notes page, you can be taking notes if you want to on it. Cosmological argument for God. All right, let's start there. Here's a photo on the screen. Maybe you know this is the Mona Lisa, one of the most famous paintings of all time, painted by Leonardo da Vinci around 1500. Next, we have the structure, the Eiffel Tower, probably one of the most famous structures in the world. I had to make sure that wasn't the one at King's Dominion, but I don't think it is. It was built between 1887 and 1889 in Paris. And then lastly, we have a photo of the book, The Odyssey, one of the most famous books of all time, written by Homer quite a few years ago, about 7th century BCE. The Mona Lisa hasn't always been. It had a beginning. The Eiffel Tower has not always been. It had a beginning. The Odyssey has been around a long time, but it hasn't always been. It's had a beginning. We have a famous painting, a famous structure, a famous book. Like there was some cause to bring them into existence. That word cosmological that we see there means the existence of our universe has some cause for it. Think about our universe for a second. I don't want you to think about how you believe it started, and I'm not going to talk about that right now, but everyone believes the universe had a beginning. Like at some point in time, there was this starting point that started this thing that we live in now, this universe, but there had to be some cause for this universe to come to existence. What was that cause? Here's what scientist Francis Collins, in his book, The Language of God, wrote. He said, "We have this very solid conclusion that the universe had an origin, the Big Bang. 15 billion years ago, the universe began with an unimaginably bright flash of energy from an infinitesimally small point. That implies that before that, there was nothing. I can't imagine how nature, in this case the universe, could have created itself. And the very fact that the universe had a beginning implies that someone was able to begin it. And it seems to me that had to be outside of nature." I'm not here to debate Big Bang versus creative narrative, okay? That's not the point here. The point here is here we have this scientist, Francis Collins, who says things just don't come into existence out of nothing. In fact, what does he say here at the end? Something or someone, outside of nature had to create this. Is the cosmological argument for God proof of the existence of God? Not necessarily. But it does make you ask, could it be God? So that's one argument we have for the existence of God. Here's another one, the teleological argument for God. The human brain is full of billions of neurons. We have trillions of synaptic connections with those neurons. They give us the ability to process information, to generate consciousness, and control every aspect of our being. What about our cardiovascular system? It's a vast network of 60,000 miles of blood vessels that go throughout our body. They're carrying blood that are filled with oxygen and nutrients to every cell in our body, all pumped there by this thing that we call the heart. Or how about our immune systems? We got about 1.8 trillion cells in our body. And their main duty is to defend our bodies against attacks from outside viruses and bacteria, right? We could go on and on about the intricacies and the complexities of the human body. Not to mention the intricacies and complexities we see in nature, that we see in animals, that we even see in the universe. Now, this argument here says the world exhibits a purpose and a design. Like there actually is a creator. First one says there's a cause, but this one says there's some sort of creator. I mean, how else do we explain the universe? Think about this. One slight deviation in our universe would render our universe incapable of life, and yet here we are. Now, where does this complexity come from? Let's think about it this way. What are the chances that this all just comes into existence on its own? Well, I got a number for you, okay? The chance of the universe existing as it does, supporting nature and humanity, are 1 in a trillion trillion. Like that's a really big number if you look it up, okay? Think about it this way. The chance of you being struck by lightning in your lifetime is 1 in 15,300. The chance of you being attacked by a shark is 1 in 3.75 million. The chance of you winning the Powerball lottery is 1 in 292 million, okay? The chance of all three of these things happening to you in your lifetime, 1 in 16 quintillion, 300 quadrillion, okay? So you're saying there's a chance, right? Yeah, but highly unlikely, okay? You have a greater chance of all three of those things happening to you in your life than the chances of the universe just coming into existence on its own without some intelligent design, without some creator that makes it to support nature and humanity. See, when we look at this universe, there's like this apparent purpose to it. There's order to it. There's complexities to it. There's this design. I mean, there has to be some designer. There has to be some creator. Now, does this argument prove that God exists? Again, not necessarily. But it's hard to look at the complexities. It's hard to look at the order that we see, the purpose of life, the design around us, and think that it was just random. There needed to be some intelligent designer behind it who crafted it with the precision and this purpose in mind. And so again, there's an argument for the existence of God. Third argument, I would say, for the existence of God is that there's a moral argument for the existence of God. Many of you know that being a Cowboys fan is right and being a Commanders fan is wrong, right? We know that. We also know that traveling down I-95 on a summer Saturday, heading south and on a vacation is right if you leave before 6 a.m. We know that it's wrong if you leave after 6 a.m. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Having a dog is right. Having a cat is, help me out, wrong. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Those really aren't moral things, but they're kind of fun. But when it comes to life, all of us have this moral compass. There are things inside of us inherently we know are right, and there are things inside of us inherently that we know are wrong. I like the way Tim Keller said it in his book, Reason for God. It's one of the books that we invite you to read. He's actually got a couple of good books on God. He says this, he says, if there is no God, there can be no good reason to be kind, to be loving, or to work for peace. If the world is made by a God of peace, justice, and love, then that is why we know that violence, oppression, and hate are wrong. If you insist on a secular view of the world, and yet you continue to pronounce some things right and some things wrong, then I hope you see the deep disharmony between the world your intellect has devised and the real world and God that your heart knows exists. I put it this way, that if there is no God, then there are no morals and we live accordingly. Right? If there is no God, we would live like animals. We would have no morals, we would have no laws, we would have no rules. It basically would be kill or be killed. That's the way that we would live our lives. But if there is a God, and that God made humans, then those humans would have these innate feelings of, like, I know what's right and I know what's wrong. And we would live according to those morals in our lives, even when we've not been told what those morals are. This is the moral argument for God. Now, does this prove that God exists? Again, not necessarily, but if we look at the world that we live in, and we think about the morals that we see, like, they must have come from somewhere. There must be some higher source. There must be some moral lawgiver that put this into a part of our DNA, that created us to know what's right and wrong. And so there's this moral argument for the existence of God. And then lastly, there's an experiential argument for the existence of God. Maybe before you knew God, followed Jesus, maybe in your life, you're like, some things just happened you just couldn't quite explain. Maybe there was this miracle that took place for someone that you know was sick or had a disease, and you know the prognosis wasn't good, and yet all of a sudden there's this miracle that happens and they're healed. Or maybe for you, you're going through this really tough crisis in your life and you're not sure how you're going to make it through it, but in the midst of it, you sort of feel this peace and calm in your soul, and you're able to move forward, and you're not quite sure where that has come from or why you're experiencing that. There's something that happened in your life, something that happened in you, something divine that helped you through those times or brought about that healing. And many of us here would say, well, yeah, we know exactly where that came from. Like, that came from God. Now, this experiential argument for the existence of God is very personal. Like, I can't confirm what you went through. You can't confirm what I went through. But as we look through this, as we understand it a little bit more, we get to this place of seeing that people who have these experiential moments with something divine, again, we're going to call that God here, like, they're changed. They're different. They're transformed. Something happens in their life, and it makes them different than who they once were. How does that come into being? How does that come into play in our lives? Well, maybe that comes from God. There are many other arguments about the existence of God. I think a couple of places I've seen, there's up to 12. And again, you can do your own research. But I want to go back to something Paul wrote in Romans. He writes this letter to the Christians in Rome, and he says this in Romans chapter 1, verse 19 through 20. He says, they know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. For some of us, the existence of God is obvious, right? That we believe that God exists. We still can't see God or hear God or touch God, but we believe in the existence of God. And where does that come from? Well, it could come through these arguments, but it really comes to this thing called faith. Every day we live by faith. When you get on 395 during rush hour to go to work and come home, guess what? You live by faith. Right now, flying out of Reagan Airport, you live by a lot of faith, right? Sitting in that chair you're sitting in right now. It takes faith. Structurally, you believe that chair is going to hold you up. I mean, every day we exhibit faith in all we do. So in the end, this belief in the existence of God really comes down to this thing called faith. The writer of Hebrews says it this way: faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Now, we could look at these arguments that we just talked about, and you might be able to say, hey, because there is this universe, it started somehow. There was a cause to it. Because there's so much complexity in this universe, because humans innately know right or wrong, because I've experienced God in my life, I can say, yes, there is a God who exists and I believe in. But if you're someone who's looking for logical reason, if you're someone who's looking for this empirical evidence, you probably won't find that God. That one that you can see, hear, and touch. That leaves us with faith. But you might say, well, you know what? For me to believe in the existence of God, I need to be 100% certain of this God. I got a big question for you if that's you. Do you need 100% certainty in all of your life? Think about your daily life. Think about what that would look like if you said, I need 100% certainty in all that I do. Because you would never move, you would never travel, you would never work, you would never drive, you would never date, you would never get married, you would never have kids. Like you would never do anything, because everything that we do in life requires some kind of faith. Everything in life needs some kind of faith. We live our daily lives 100% committed to it, without 100% certainty of what it will bring. And that requires faith. Now, when it comes to faith, this faith that God exists means we get to this place where like, I'm 100% committed to this, but I may not be 100% certain. Right? I've never seen God, I've never heard God, I've never touched God, but yet I have this incredible faith that God exists. But if we don't have that faith, how do we find that faith? Well, I'm going to go back to what Paul said there in Acts to these philosophers in Acts chapter 17, verse 27. He said his purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. I read those words there and I think, well, what's our best step forward? Maybe if we struggle with the existence of God and knowing God is real, and maybe some of these arguments feel right to us, how do we move forward? How do we gather this faith? Well, a big part of it is you got to search for that on your own, right? Or you search for that in a community of people, community of believers, like a church like this. So you take time reading some of those books that we have on that resource page. More than anything, you just take time sitting down and read Scripture. When you look at the Bible, what do you see? You see people over and over again that I think struggled with the existence of God, and they have to have this faith to believe that. In fact, there in Hebrews chapter 11, there's this whole passage about faith. These people that had faith, they never saw God, they never experienced God, and yet they have this incredible faith. That faith is something that we have to seek out. Does God exist? Well, if we question that, I believe we've got to take the time to search for those answers in any way we possibly can. And that takes time, and that takes effort. In some ways, that takes a lot of faith to even take that step. About this God who exists. As a kid, I would ask my parents some pretty tough questions, maybe like many of us did. But yet I can remember spending many nights lying in my bed. My dad was a pastor my whole life, and so we were in church all the time. But, I had this understanding of God, but I wasn't quite sure about God. And I'd lay in my bed at night, my eyes would be closed, and I would just be thinking about, where did God come from, right? Like I hear about God all the time. Where's God's beginning? Everything else in life has a beginning. Where's God's beginning? What's the cause for God to exist? And then I'd ask myself, does this God exist? And there's so many nights I would stay up for, and this probably sounds weird, maybe for hours, just thinking through that particular question in life. As I've gotten older, honestly, those questions are still there. Some of them aren't fully answered at this point, and I'm still looking for answers to those questions about God. And yet, if I kind of think through it, and I think about the beauty and the complexities and the intricacies of our universe, and understanding it can't just come from nowhere. Someone had to create everything that we can experience or we experience in life. Or there's this part of me that throughout my life, there's been these faith crises. There's been these experiences that I've actually had where God has been present, even when I didn't think God was near. And through those moments, through those crises in my life where my faith has been challenged, I keep coming back that there's been this steadying force in my life. And so my conclusion is, well, even though I don't fully know, hey, guess what? I'm 100% committed to this God. I can't touch this God or hear this God or see this God, but I fully believe in this God, a God who loves me and cares for me and wants the best for me. A God who loves you and cares for you and wants the best for you. But you want to know what really makes me believe in the existence of God is actually Jesus. Jesus says this in John chapter 20, verse 29, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." Even today, I still have some questions about God, but I keep coming back to this guy named Jesus. Because even though there may be these questions about God, I fully believe in Jesus. I mean, I know it's in the Bible. So I'm like, well, you can't define Jesus because he was in the Bible. Those are made up stories. Well, for me, they're not. There's too many things that fit that make me understand, hey, that guy was real. Then we look at history, and we have historical people that are talking about this guy named Jesus. I fully believe Jesus exists. And because I believe that Jesus was real, I believe in the existence of this God. I believe that God sent Jesus to this world to prove to us, hey, I am real. I exist. And I fully love you. And I care for you, and I want the best for you, and I want you to follow me.